Hello there girls and boys, today I'm gonna tell you why drums in the 80s sounded like this. Hey, welcome back to the channel. As said before, today we'll be exploring a music production technique that was extremely popular in the dark age of technology, also known as the 80s. This is known as gated reverb, and you can hear it everywhere from Whitesnake, Guns N' Roses, Peter Gabriel, you name it. It was the hip thing to do, as it was the style of the time. It was so popular in fact that it became a meme even before that was a thing. And it went out of fashion once everybody tried to dress up as lumberjacks. But it is still a great technique that can be used and is still used to add an extra spark to modern music, and in this video I will show you how it works and how to do it yourself. But before we go, if this is your first time on the channel, I welcome you, because in here I show you every single thing I do in order to create, produce, and of course perform my music live. Because I know that making a living as a musician is not a dream, it's a possibility. And if I can do it, of course you can do it. With that being said, let's get into it. Welcome back to Logic Pro X, girls and boys. In front of us with the project that I'm gonna use to show you how this technique works. First and foremost, what's the basis behind this technique? The idea is to create an stupidly big, gigantic snare sound by applying an effect that it will extend the tail of the sound of the snare itself. How can we do that? We got different effects in our arsenal, and one of them is called reverb. And reverb, it's a special effect that allows us to recreate the sound of any space artificially speaking. And of course, depending on the size of the space, it's how large and how long will it take for any sound to fade away. Now, imagine that you step inside of a gigantic cathedral, and imagine the sound of your voice inside of that cathedral. Now, picture yourself in the bathroom, and imagine the sound of your voice inside of a bathroom. That's reverb, okay? Now, when you clap, you can hear that the sound of your clap, it's super long. The release tail, it's extended because of the dimensions of the space. That's exactly the philosophy behind this technique. Now, how to do it with music production tools? Let's do it! This is what we're gonna be doing first. I'm gonna press play and you will hear this performance. This is just a drum performance, and then I will be adding the effect little by little, and once that happens I will explain to you how to do it. Here we go! That's how it is. It's an interesting technique because you can go overboard, you can go full 80s and create something that it's cheesy sounding, or you can create these amazing, powerful, punchy sounding drums. So now let me explain how it works. So here's the deal, girls and boys. The first thing that we're gonna have to take a look at, it's gonna be at our mixer. And here you can see that I got all of the drum tracks already set. Every single one of them is here. And you can see that over here I got some cents. A cent, it's imagine that we are sending a copy, an exact copy of the information contained on that track to another track where we are gonna process that information without affecting the original sound of the first track. Hopefully that made sense to you, girls and boys. And what we're gonna do in here, we're gonna be sending our snare sound to this S-verb auxiliary track, which you will find somewhere over here. Here it is. And in here I got a reverb plugin, as you can see here, and in this time around we're using Verb Suite Classics, but then I got a gate, and that's where things will get super interesting. Look, what a gate does, it's allowing sound coming and out based on a response. In this case, I am using the original sound of my snare to let the gate know that they have to let some information go through it. And since we can control for how long our gate can stay open through the use of this release knob, we can control how big and how extended the tail is. Here is how it works. I'm going to press play and we're going to start to mess around with the release. Here we go. And I already can hear you. How on earth can you tell the compressor to react to the sound of the snare? Here's how. There is this little thing known as Sidechain. And in here, when you click on this little arrow, you will have this contextual menu. And in here, you have three different options: audio, input, and bus. And on audio, it's where you're gonna find all of the different tracks inside of your project. And in this case, I'm using snare butt, because that's exactly where our sound it's coming from, okay? So we're triggering the gated reverb by every single hit of my snare. Good. In case you wanted to use, for example, this technique in a live environment, you can do the same if you set the input to be the one that it's triggering. When would you use such a thing? That's a good question. Imagine that you are recording a podcast. You can set this thing to only open when you are talking, or when music kicks in, it will close. Something like that, girls and boys. It's up to you. Now, as I just showed to you, we can control for how long we want to keep the door open. In this case, the release is not controlling for how long it's going to stay open. It's how long it will take for the door to be fully closed. That's what we want to do, because otherwise we're going to get a choppy sound, and that doesn't sound natural at all. So with the release tail, we can control how the sound of the effect is going to be gradually fading away. That's cool. So far, we've been listening to this reverb, and in this case, we're using a whole algorithm, which has kind of like a whole sound to it, okay? But let me show you what will happen if we use a different plugin. I'm going to turn that off, and we're going to bring back a little plate. This time around, we're going to be using a plate reverb. Here we go. And please pay close attention to how the sound is going to be completely different. Interesting, right? This the hole was a little bit brighter in sound, and the plate was darker. Why? The algorithms react differently, and they have different ways to create the reverb. And that's one of many things that I like about this technique, because this allows you to come up with your own flavor, and actually you can switch the sound of your reverb tail depending on this track. That's awesome. Now let me show you how it would react using a much more elaborated reverb. This time around, we're not using an algorithmically recreated sound. This time around, we're using IRs, which it's exactly the same thing you use on your guitars if you are a guitar player. This thing, it's mimicking, through the use of incredibly complex computer science, mimicking the reflections of a certain space. Yeah. And it sounds like this. Out of the three, this is the one that I prefer the most, and I would like to know which one do you think is the best. And the reason why I like this better, it's because it's a little bit subtle. And it allows you to add it little by little in a way that it's not quite in your face. But again, for each his own, right? Now, let's give a run for its money to the three of them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove the effect completely. And we're going to hear the drum track by its own for a few bars. And then I'm going to be bringing each of them one by one, okay? The trick is this: every time that I'm gonna bring a different effect, I will have to balance it. And actually that's gonna be a good thing, because it will allow you to here how far can you push the effect. So here we go. First, without anything. And then we're gonna follow the order. Verb suite, little plate, and then EW spaces. Here we go. Quite cool, isn't it? One more thing before we go. One thing that I forgot to mention is that you can also control how fast the door is gonna open when it comes to the gate. That can give you weird results, because my recommendation is the following. Make sure that your gate opens as soon as the snare is hit, okay? Then make sure that your reverb is fast enough to react at the very moment on which the snare is being hit. For example, here using Verb Suite as an example, you have access to these controls over here. Make sure that your attack is as fast as it can be. That way, it's gonna the reverb is gonna come in as soon as the snare comes into the reverb channel. And the final step, make sure that you control the release to a point on which it feels musical. That's up to you, girls and boys. I cannot tell you how fast or for how long does the door has to be open. That's up to you. There you have it. You know, I find kind of funny that for as much as people refer to this technique as part of the cheesy sound of the 80s, it is part of some of the most revered records in music history. To a point on which I would even dare to say that without it, those tracks might not have been as influential as they were and still are, given the emotional weight and power this effect adds when not overused to the sound of your drums. Hopefully you found this video to be interesting and you learned something new out of this. I would like to know what you think about this technique in the comment section down below. And of course, if you like to support this channel, the best way to do it is by listening to music on Apple Music or Spotify, and also by following us on Instagram and other social media outlets, such as Getter, for example, because that's the best way for you to get in touch with us in a much more personal basis. Now, with that being said, girls and boys, I gotta remind you something. Never, ever, ever let anybody tell you what to dream about. And remember that I will see you when I see you.